Okay, so today I want to walk us through a little bit of troubleshooting I had to do with this computer. This is a very old, uh, well, not very old, probably 2012 MacBook Pro. And I've had some problems in the past with the wireless card, so I've just installed CentOS 7. And I'm going to show you a little bit about the troubleshooting that I did when I noticed that my wireless was not working. It said it could not, or it said basically I couldn't turn it on. So the first step, I think, is to see if your operating system can even detect the wireless card. So there's a couple ways to do this. I think the best or the most helpful one is a command called ls PCI. And as you can see, with a short description, it's going to list all of the PCI devices. So basically what's plugged into the different PCI slots or buses. And there's a lot of different stuff that you can do with this command. I wouldn't get overwhelmed because it even says at some point in here that a lot of this information really isn't going to make sense to anybody, but I think it said like experienced PCI hackers, which that is definitely not me. But we can use it in this case to see if the operating system is detecting a wireless card at all. So let's just take a look at the raw output here. You want to run this command with root privileges because it's going to be able to detect more information. Alright, so we can see here a little bit of output. We can see it'll tell us the different PCI devices. Looks like here there's some expansion buses for SATA controller, Ethernet, FireWire, etc. So right here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is some numbers that correspond to the different slots or buses, and we can use that to get a little more detailed information. But first, let's just do a little bit of parsing here so we don't have to read all of this. So let's do the sudo lspci command and pipe that into a grep function for network. And as you can see right here, this just gives us what we want here, which is this wireless card, this Broadcom wireless card, which has been a consistent pain for me to deal with. And we'll explore why in a little bit. But first, let's get a little bit more output here. So we can use this slot number to give us a little more information. So let's do this. Sudo ls PCI, and we're going to do V for verbose and S for the slot number. Give it right here. And as we can see, we have the name, we have the model, and some other information here. You can add some more V's, but that's probably not going to give you, it's probably going to give you a lot more information than you need. But you can see here kernel modules and the driver information. And if this is not working, this is going to be one of the first, if the wireless isn't working, but LSCPI is showing us a wireless card, this information right here, the driver and the module, is going to be one of the first things we're going to look at for troubleshooting. Let's see here. So there's another way that you can get to some of this information, and that is if we add an N tag here, and that's going to give us the device number, which is right here, 14E4. So we can also specify by device instead of slot. So let's do that. Instead of slot, we'll use D. And then we simply just use the device number up here. So that's 14E4 semicolon 4331. Okay, and it basically gives us the same output. Let's look here. Looks like it might be exactly the same actually, but so those are a few different options, some of the different tags you can use with that command to get the output that you're looking for. So let's do this. Let's first let's use the lsmod command, and that's going to show us a list of the kernel modules. As you can see, there's quite a bit here, as you would expect. But let's do a quick search based on the LSCPI output, which you can see right here, kernel modules BCMA. So let's just grep for that. lsmod grep BCMA. Okay. So let's take a look of what these different columns mean. So the size, and then we can see the driver that the module is used by. So right here, that's B43. Now you're gonna have to take my word for it, but this BCMA module was using a different driver file. And I had to download the new one, which we're going to talk about, and I had to unload the old module and reload this correct B43. So how do you know what to look for? How do you know if you can find the right firmware and driver file and the different software to install it? Well, honestly, the best way, or the way that I use, I'm not sure if it's the best way, probably not actually, is to do a Google search for this Broadcom wireless chip. So we can do a Google search for BCMA 4331 or Broadcom 802.11. And I'm going to show you a couple of the sites that I found using that were helpful. So even though we're not using Arch Linux, the documentation is excellent, and it is going to tell us a little bit about some of these Broadcom wireless drivers and the different problems that Linux has had using it. So it'll give you a history here. And basically, originally Broadcom did not support or give an open source version of its drivers. And so there was an effort made by the Linux community to reverse engineer some of these open source drivers. And they resulted in these two, B43, which you can see that I installed, and B43 Legacy for a little bit older chips. So this is an excellent source of information. I'm definitely going to include it in the show notes. But let's take a look here at another website that I found, and I'll link to, from Wireless Linux. And it's going to give us a little bit more information about what we need to find here. So if you can remember our chip ID here, it was BCM4331. So let's find that. BCM4331. And let's check the device ID. Yes, that matches. And let's check out some of these other columns. So this is saying, is this supported? Okay, so yes, and then it gives us some different, I think this is the Linux kernel version that supports it. And we can also see right here the modes. So Oops, lost my spot here. ABCGN, not really sure what that means, but that was on the output of our LSPCI. And then it's also going to give us the physical version, not really sure what that means either, and some alternative drivers here. So, let's scroll down a little bit here, and it's going to give us some very good information about installing the firmware. And basically, what we're going to need here is, let's look at Fedora. Since we're using CentOS, it's somewhat similar. And it's telling us that what we're going to need here is a pretty common tool, wget, and this B43FW cutter. And this is software that is going to extract the firmware from the Windows driver, which we can download. Broadcom did release that. They just did not release a proprietary version. This FW Cutter program is something that the open source community uses to get the firmware that they need based on the Windows driver. So this set of commands will work if you just use sudo yum install this B43 FW cutter, and if you don't have it, wget. However, I should mention, if you are using CentOS and you haven't added some of the extra repositories, you might. I'm not sure if it's the RPM Fusion repository or just the extra one, but you will have to add that. You will not. The repositories that come standard with CentOS 7 will not give you this B43FW cutter. So let me just do a little search here. It's a little bit slow. We'll come back to this a little later. Oh, it's complete. Okay. So, yes, we do find it in our yum search. And let's see if it can tell me. I'm not sure exactly which repository this is found in, but as you can see, these are some of the ones. I've added these RPM Fusion repositories, and this EPEL repository. So it's definitely in one of those three. I believe it is in the EPEL repository. I'm not going to go into how to add that. You can find other information on that elsewhere. So that is one option for installing B43FW cutter. However, what I used, because I hadn't added that repository at the time, and I should mention that you're obviously going to use your Ethernet connection to be getting this information. So here is the way to install it from source. It's pretty simple. It gives you the address here, and it will also give you some of the fingerprint information so you can verify it. You're basically going to unpack it, cd into the directory, and then do a make and make install. So pretty simple, but that is going to give you the FW cutter tool for the driver. So now what you actually need is the driver file. So you can do that by, let's scroll up here a little bit and see if it'll give us some other information. Okay, so it is here. So you will use this. You can use this website and wget to install the source code. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us fingerprints or any of that information. But you can sort of go to this website here sort of see if it looks legitimate. So obviously this isn't best security practices, but I did do this, and you can kind of explore around here and, you know, see if, you know, this looks legitimate or not. There might be another way to do this securely, but I'm not aware of it. So let's go back here. So same deal. We're going to, it's going to tell us, you know, just to create this variable so that it's a little bit easier for us to use the FW tool. So basically here's what I want to focus on. So after you get these files, which you can view in the link show notes, basically what we're going to need to do is to use this FW cutter tool. And I believe this W flag is going to allow us to use this variable right here. So if you look at what this says, it's giving you little verbose output here for the path. So you're gonna, when you download this and unpack it, there's going to be a Broadcom folder, and then driver, and then whatever this means, and then this right here is the file that you're looking for. This is the file that you want B43 FW cutter to work on. And if you follow this install guide, you're going to set the directory that you want to install, that you want the output from FW cutter working on this driver file to go into. So which would be lib firmware. That's where you want your firmware information, obviously. So basically, to sum it up, we're going to use B43 FW cutter, and it's going to use the Windows driver file for our wireless card. So B43 FW cutter is going to be using the wireless driver, and it's going to place the firmware that it gets from that in our lib firmware directory, which is where we want it. So let me just show you some of the directories that this created for me. Maybe it'll sort of help to clear things up. I can't really, I mean, to do this again, I would have to start fresh, and that'd probably be the best way, but I'm not going to do that because it took a lot of work to get this working, and I don't want to do it again. So let's take a look at some of these directories. So in my home directory, I created a software folder, and that is where I use wget to get the files for FW cutter and the B43 firmware. I'm sorry, B43 driver file. So let's take a look here. So let's cd into Broadcom WL, and then as you can see right here, the name of the folder is 5.10.56 blah blah blah. And you can see these the tar and these tar balls that I downloaded and I had to extract from. So you extract from the tar ball, and it'll give you this directory with the files. And let's look inside. .3. And then we can go into the driver. Oops. And cd wl, and we can see that this matches our driver file wlprebuilt.o. So ls, it's right here, wlprebuilt.o. So I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what these things mean or what they include or what all these files are, but I have learned enough to be able to do this. So by no means is this an expert video about firmware or drivers or kernel modules, but it's meant to just give you an example of how, without knowing exactly what all those things are, you can still sort of troubleshoot your way through this. So that is the driver file that B43FW Cutter is going to be working on. So let's go back to the software folder. And we can see right here that if we go to this Broadcom WL, .138, oops, so I believe this is the legacy driver, which I also installed. So, as you can see here, this is the B43FW Cutter file, and it's the RPM file that I used to install it. So, let's take a look at the resulting firmware. Again, just to sort of reiterate, because it is a little bit complicated here, we use B43FW Cutter to work on the Windows device driver for a wireless card, and the output of that was the firmware that our Linux machine can use to be able to use the wireless card. So let's take a look in lib firmware. As you can see, there's a lot here, all the different firmware that this machine uses. Right here, B43 and B43 Legacy. I did not need to install B43 Legacy, but I did this just in case. But if I had read the documentation a little bit better, I did not need to do this. So what we do need to do is to unload the wrong module. So we can take a look here. It gives us a little bit of information about that. So you can use mod probe R and to remove these different kernel modules that are not working correctly. So in my case, it was this. I had these kernel modules, BCR, MS Mac, and BCMA. So I just remove these, and then you load in the correct kernel module, which in my case was mod probe B43, and then when we do ls mod grep B43, we can see it right here, B43, and then we also have BCMA using B43. So that's what we want. However, in my case, when I did this, it did not work. So I had to do a little bit more digging. And here we are going to look for some information that I found about the Linux kernel version right here. Nope, that's not right. go back up. Here we go. Let's find our chip, BCM4331. And this is the kernel version that supports it. So I had to take a look at what kernel version I was using, and I was actually very surprised to discover that I was using something lower than this, 3.0, I believe. Not quite sure why that is. I did do the CentOS minimal install. That might have something to do with it. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure, but let me clear this out so I can show you how to find that information. Now, I have since upgraded the kernel version, but you can use this information, this command, to find the version of the kernel you're using. So uname.r. So I've since upgraded to 4.19.2, which is the current long-term supported version of the kernel. So once I did that, actually let me talk a little bit about that, and I'm also going to link to this article about how to upgrade to the kernel. It's really not that difficult. So basically what you're going to be doing is some security stuff here with the GPG key, and then you are going to install the kernel package, which you can find, and some of these repos that's going to ask you to get, and use yum to install it, and then when you reboot you can find it here. And yep, this is exactly the screen that I had. I was using 3.10, which, as you can see here, was too low to support the modules that I had installed. So I upgraded to 4.19, and after that reboot, I did not have to manually unload and load modules. It just basically worked after that. And then there's also in this article, there's some information on how to make the new kernel version your default version by editing the grub files. So just to wrap up a little bit here, I'm going to include these 3 articles in the show notes. This is excellent documentation for troubleshooting this old Broadcom wireless card. This has not been a huge issue recently because Broadcom has since released the open source version of their drivers, but at least for the older proprietary drivers, you are going to have to use these reverse engineered programs and drivers and such. So if you are using old equipment, particularly old MacBooks, and your wireless driver is not working after you install a new operating system, I would recommend some of these steps is the first place to look. I would also say that on Debian this is much easier. There is the FW, there's I think it's a B43 firmware installer that is available in the repositories, and you simply just install that, and I'm not sure if you even have to, if that's even something that you run. I believe it is because it's called installer, but anyways, it's basically that simple, and then just reload the correct module. But there's a lot of information out here, but this is something that can be initially very troubling once you load your new operating system and you see, oh hey, wireless isn't working. That's a pretty big problem. So I hope that you learned something from this video. You can find me a couple different places. You can find me on Mastodon at J26Brad, and that's the instance that I use is linuxrocks.online. I'm also on Twitter at J26Brad. You can find me on GitHub, and these will all be linked in the show notes. And my username is, well, I'm not going to sign in here, is, well, I will, just because my name's a little bit hard to spell, is B26Brad. I'm sorry, BJelnick26. And I just have a collection of very simple scripts on there. And I'm also on LinkedIn. And you can just find me by searching my name, Brad Jelinek. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching.